Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those listening here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. I guess we got Barbara back.
I'm here.
And Jeff, are you back?
Yeah, Skype decided to completely reboot itself and reinstall itself. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, nice timing. Yes,
I did mine before I got on. So
yeah, but it just opened earlier. It didn't say, oh, you got to. Usually it'll do that when I open it, but
yeah,
just decided now is a good time.
Well, I want to welcome back Christopher Balzano.
Maybe.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay. Great.
I never left you.
You never left. I didn't know if you was in one of them graveyards or something looking. So.
Well, you brought up, and it's interesting because the other thing I really love is pirate stories.
Mm-hmm.
And there really aren't a lot of pirate love stories.
You know, I'm excited, and I'll tell you the story. But I'm excited because there's a really great investigator down here, a researcher, I should say, down here, who's decided to give. He's given it up. He doesn't want to do this anymore, and he was really happy with how I had treated his story, and how I had actually credited him in my book and sent him a free copy as a thank you of it. And he said, I want to give you all of this research that I have on pirate legends all up and down the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, which is where I am. And I cannot wait to open up that file. And he said, all I've got to do is fix my hard drive, because I was like, just send it to me. Send me the whole computer. I will pay for it. And I'll do whatever it takes to get this information. So I'm just waiting to see how that plays out, because, we don't generally tend to think of pirates and romance, and the story is really not that romantic. So it's in Bradenton, Florida. There's this area of the Manatee River which for years was known to sing. And the original story that people would tell about it has to do with the two tribes that were essentially split, the Timucua and the Calusa, by this river. And it's a typical story that you would think of: two separate tribes. One is the son of the Timucua chief. The other is the daughter of the Calusa, and they would meet in the middle of the Manatee River because they weren't allowed to share their love. But the river was kind of neutral territory. And they fell in love, and he said to her, I want to take you away. And she said, I'm not sure I can, not that I don't love you, but if you ever drink from the spring that's on my side of the water, it says that you will never find peace in any other place. And so I don't know if I can do it. But their love was so strong that they decided to go against all of that. And he proposed, and she accepted, and the river started to sing. And he said, he was all scared, and she said, no, don't worry. That's the voices of my people, and they are telling me, they're telling us that they approve of this marriage. And what it actually was the story goes that there was a tribe there back in the day or an early part of the Calusa that were going to be wiped out. And rather than surrendering, or rather than risking war, they all decided to commit suicide in the water at the same time. And they started to sing this song, and then they just kind of like jumped into water as they were singing this song. And to this day, you can hear the sound of those people continuing to sing. Now, this is actually a good, most of the stories like this don't end well. This ends up well in that they are married till the end of their days. Eventually, the Calusa chief decides to open the tribe up and unite them, which is the reason why there are no Timucua anymore. And they live happily ever after. And so that's one story that exists in that area. But the more I dug into why this singing happens, and now the singing is completely probably a natural physical reaction that's happening in the water, right? If you think of it in terms of my niece, who is going for her PhD in chemistry, compared it to essentially dropping Alka-Seltzer into a thing of water, and how there's a physical reaction and you hear sound. That's
Right.
probably what explains what this singing is in that area. And yet they found the need to actually steal a legend that's very popular on the Mississippi River and attach it to this. But then they tell this other one, because there's something else weird that happens in that location. So Miguel Pascal, who is known as the Butcher, was being chased by this commandant further up north. And he decided to do a little intel on this guy. And in doing it, he discovered his daughter, who he absolutely fell in love with. And as most people who are in love do, he kidnapped her, and he snuck her onto the boat. And he decided that you will not leave until you fall in love with me, and then maybe I'll let you be around the ship, but you're going to be my statesroom until then. And obviously, as most people do when they're kidnapped, she was depressed by this. And to make her feel better, he took the strings of a harp and he put them all in the windows of the stateroom so that whenever the wind blew, there would be this beautiful music, and eventually she'll fall in love with him because she'll be hearing this beautiful music all of the time. Oddly enough, that didn't work, and she still didn't like him. And when he went off to conduct another raid, she snuck down, she punctured holes in the hull of the ship, and then set the armory on fire. And so the whole thing blew up. Everyone there died, and they sunk to the bottom of the Manatee River. And because it had burnt up before, that's why there are no remains that people ever find of it, which of course is ridiculous, right? But people say that on certain nights, not only can you still hear that singing, but you can actually see the giant ship rising from the water itself. And we went there one night, and we were more focused on the Native American legend. And so we went there and we recited a poem that was inspired by this story. And just as we were finishing the poem, once again, I've got this video up on both the YouTube and the Facebook page. There began in the middle of that Manatee River, these weird waves started to happen. The kind of waves that happen, that kind of like concussion, Jurassic Park kind of waves, like when something is coming up out of the water, and we saw this dark object come out of the water, and then before it reached the top, go back under. And so I can't tell you if that was actually the Butcher's ship and the beautiful maiden who didn't like the music being played on the harp strings on her windows, but it definitely was something that we experienced.
Well, considering he dismantled the harp, she probably went to the strings and says, well, now you're too small to be a harp. And they just said, you calling me a liar?
You were waiting for that joke for like 5 minutes. You even put on a sticky note next to your computer, be like, when he finishes rambling on about whatever he's rambling on about, I'm throwing this joke out there.
And this is the
I was also pointing out, it's not like the singing was Hertz frequencies being on the water, it's just waves.
Oh, follow-up joke.
What'd you say, Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay, don't forget to tip your waiters.
Try the meal.
Barbara,
and it's the Manatee River?
Yes, in Bradenton, Florida. And it's
one would assume
really
there
popular story.
Yeah. One would assume there are manatees in the river?
There are no manatees in that part of the river anymore because it's actually fairly built up now.
Okay. But back then there would have been manatees.
There definitely would have been, yeah.
Okay.
there are manatees up in where Tomoka is, in the river.
Are
right
there
there.
really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It sure is.
I didn't know how many there were on the East Coast.
Well, that's, they come in, I'm sure, out of the Cape River there. And
right.
Cape Fear River. Or not Cape Fear, but out of the waterway. But anyway, they do have a enclosed area. It's not enclosed, but they do feed them and stuff in that area right there.
Yeah, and and I get what you're hitting at, Barbara. Trust me, I get what you're saying. Things coming out of the water, and I think manatees are mistaken by a lot of people who are newcomers to Florida for other things. And of course, there's the whole. We were talking about the Fountain of Youth, the whole idea of manatees being mermaids and things like that. So I definitely get how animals can be mistaken for a lot of these legends. Yeah.
Now,
But boy, I cannot wait for the pirate book. And I hope you do it.
Hope.
Yeah.
well, that's just another show.
Of
So
course, you want to buy a legit version, not a pirate copy. So
Yeah, not a pirated copy. Yeah.
But it is funny how few ghostly legends are attached to pirates that I've been able to track down and been able to, other than like a few, random words on the internet, been able to see like a legitimate a pirate legend that I could actually go and explore in Legend Trip.
There are very few.
Yeah.
And it's mostly about guarding treasure,
Right.
a buried treasure somewhere, and that's pretty much it.
because they always said the legends were that if you were on treasure burying detail, it's sort of like a one-way trip. I would like
Right.
maybe I'll skip this one, Captain. I'm just saying.
Well, it is interesting that the follow-up to that story is that I'm not sure how long he grieved for, but a few years later, there was a mysterious ship that sailed down into the Manatee River, used explosives right near the location of where the singing part is, and is said to have escaped with, the butcher's treasure. So,
Wow.
so good for him.
Yeah.
if you found something, yes. Now, have you been up to Wilmington, North Carolina?
I don't think I've been up to Wilmington. We went to the Piedmonts. Is Wilmington near the Piedmonts?
No, Wilmington is on the coast, down by toward Carolina Beach, or Carolina Beach just south of that. But anyway, there's a house that used to be the Chamber of Commerce building in Wilmington, and it's the old Price Gauss house. The house is supposed to be haunted. The hill there where it sets on was a place called Hangman's Knob or something like that, where they hung all the criminals of the early days in Wilmington. My mom, I hadn't been living in Wilmington maybe 6-7 months, something like that. And she sent me this magazine. It's a Fate magazine. And it's about the Price Gauss house. It had a picture of a woman a ghost coming down the staircase. And so my mom wanted me to go there and, just talk to them and get information. I went down and talked to the people, and they told me some of the things, that they witnessed or things that happened in the house. One was the woman said every now and then the back door will just open up and it stays locked all the time. She said that's happened more than one occasion. The story that's in the Fate magazine has articles. It talks about if you look on the outside, there's a cemetery around beside the house. If you look up at the window on the outside, you can see a window. If you go on the inside, there's not a window. So different things like that. Anyway, after we got done doing that, my wife was working for this lady taking care of her mother during the day while this woman worked. And she told that woman, about the story of this. And the woman said, wait just a minute. And she went in her bedroom and she come out with an 8x10 glossy picture of that ghost coming down the staircase, the original picture.
Oh, wow.
And here's the funny thing. She said it was real. She used to date the guy who took the picture.
Oh, my word.
Now, how much of a coincidence is this and my wife be working for? I mean, it's not anything doing with the paranormal, but it's a sure coincidence of some sort.
Well, what we call that, and this is kind of, in a lot of ways, the essence of legend tripping versus investigating, right? And we call it #follow the signs. And when the signs are pointing you some way, especially when you become open to receiving them, you kind of have to go with it, right? And it leads you to places that you aren't quite sure. So I'll give you a great example with the Manatee River story. We were having this really weird thing with birds. And so I had found 2 dead birds in my yard. And at the same time, my co-host was driving down the road, and she thought she had hit a bird. And so she decided to go look out, and she said there were no feathers, there was nothing that didn't seem that had been hit, and she was kind of it disturbed her, and she was worrying about it. And then the next day, a cardinal appeared right in her yard, and for her section of Florida, cardinals are kind of rare. I mean, they're rare in general, but it's supposed to be the cardinals is kind of this universal sign of the afterlife. And so she decided to type in some keywords about that. And so keep in mind, she's talking about birds. So it was like bird omen or something like that. And the first thing that came up after you got past like the book of, the buying a book of what omens mean and stuff like that, the first thing it had to do with an actual website that wasn't selling something was an article about the Singing River. And it was literally the week that we were planning on going. And it was an interview with a person who had written an entire series of novels, not nonfiction, but novels based around Native American legends that her grandmother had told her. And one of the legends up in Mississippi was this story of the Singing River and this idea of the tribe committing suicide. Essentially, the week before we went there, all of these different signs pointed her to this website, which actually explained the legend that we were just about to look at, which was completely unrelated. So I always say #follow the signs.
Follow the signs.
Yeah,
Follow the signs.
when you talk about legend tripping, and I think it's interesting to do that. However, if you're trying to explore, say, something like the Bridgewater Triangle, which could be really kind of dangerous, right?
Oh yeah, and the majority of, I don't think I've ever. People always want to ask me, what is the scariest place you've ever been? And I'm like, I don't get scared at these places, even though I've had some really odd and spooky things happen. I generally don't tend to get scared, except for when I'm in a location because of the people, right? Because of what actually might be going on there. And so
Yeah, the live people.
It's funny that I noticed someone in your chat room mentioned they wouldn't want to go to Bunnyman Bridge because they wouldn't want to see the bunny from The Shining. And what actually happens is people go out to the Bunnyman Bridge dressed in these really creepy bunny costumes and scare people, or even physically attack them. So when you're talking about like the Bridgewater Triangle, a place like the Assonet Ledge, I've never gone there and had something weird and spooky not happen. And yet every time I go there, or anywhere in the Freetown State Forest especially, I'm acutely aware that there's a criminal element where I am. And that I need to be more aware of that than I am aware of ghosts. And the odd thing is that we've never been attacked. As both an investigator and a legend tripper, I've never had anything bad happen. My co-host used to always carry a weapon. And every time that the outside world has interfered, it's either been someone who has helped us and actually led to an understanding of the story, or cops. And every time it's been a cop, we've gotten more information from a cop about the legend than most other people that we've spoken to in the town. So it is dangerous, but the number one thing is always to be safe. And so we don't go to places that are going to be dangerous, especially at night. And I rarely go someplace at night that I haven't been during the day, so I at least know the terrain.
Good thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you need to do that as well. Like we were following up on this story called Julia, and it's this haunting and this really great roadside legend that takes place in this town known as Lady Lake. And the story involves the woods, right? So not only do you see this woman who is either wearing white or glowing white, but she is accompanied by these absolutely horrific screams and cries for daddy, for coming from the forest and coming from the woods. And it being out there, you feel that, right? When you're in there, you're like, oh my word, like something really, really horrible could happen here. And you're wondering what this might be. And you can imagine people's imaginations going crazy over different animals that might be in these woods at night. But then I went there during the day, and it is completely residential. You just can't see it because all the houses are hidden behind these trees. And so what seems like it's a thick forest is only a first layer of forest and then someone's front yard. And so, that helped me gain perspective not only on how dangerous it might be at night or how we should actually go through the legend trip, but by being there during the day, I was able to get some understanding of how people might get confused there, because you go from a commercial setting or commercial properties to what seems as if it's woods. So yeah, you would think that people are going to see weird things out here, and in actuality, it's all houses.
Wow. So I know you basically are doing legends and ghosts, etc. But of course, if you're out traveling at night in some of these areas, what about the UFO activity? Do you see any of that?
It's really hard to. I've never encountered what I consider to be a UFO, but that's a really hard sell, because I think a lot of UFO legend and ghost legend coincide with each other, and I think a lot of it has to do with the filter that people are viewing these through, and what they know, and really oftentimes the first people they contact about it. And I was just mentioning the Assonet Ledge. So the Assonet Ledge, depending on who you ask, either has the highest reports of ghost lights in the world, and people have seen what looks like these glowing lights coming up from the water. And it's a site where there have not only been a lot of bodies dumped, because it's the entire state forest is a haven for crimes happening in Boston and Providence, Rhode Island, and Brockton, Massachusetts, these areas of crime. And then in 45 minutes, they can be in the middle of nowhere in this forest, and they dump bodies in this water. And there have been a whole bunch of suicides of people jumping off this cliff. So they see these lights, they see them under the water, they see them coming to the surface, right? And then other people have seen those same lights at the Assonet Ledge in the woods. And let's do the same thing. Oh, those are the people that are in the water, the people that have been married. They tell the same story. But if you ask other people who have spotted them, they'll tell you that it's the highest hit point or UFO sightings, because they're interpreting those same ghost lights as UFOs. So I don't think that I've ever experienced something that was dramatic or high enough in the sky for me to think of it as a UFO, nor have I ever personally had like an abduction type situation. But, oftentimes I use that as context. So like I was talking about the Ocala Woods. As soon as I opened up that I was writing about that, people wanted to tell me their skunk ape stories, and they wanted to tell me their phantom witches in the woods stories, and they wanted to tell me their alien stories, and they wanted to. And so I find that when I'm legend tripping, or even when I'm just exploring a legend, I need those kind of things, if they're being said in the same area, as context, because it helps me to understand that people in this area are having weird things going on. So never had an experience myself, but I definitely think that most of these areas most of them have the trifecta of cryptids, aliens, and ghostly sightings as well.
You're bringing up a really good point about filters and how people are perceiving things these days. And of course, now the plethora of ghost sighting shows that are on television. There's a few cryptid shows and a few UFO shows now. How do you think, is it slanting or changing the perceptions that people have of these experiences?
100%. And I think that that's how these communities have grown, right? Like you were talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. The reason why I was able to become such an important researcher into that topic was because I was one of the first people on the internet, and one of the first people to have a website that was dedicated just to Massachusetts back in the day. Mm-hmm. And so as I would publish stories that I would hear, many of them happened in the Bridgewater Triangle, and then people would go online searching because they were having experiences, and I was the site that they would find. And so I think that it all depends on where those people are coming from. I think that the way that we're presenting it approaches it, right? And you see these cycles of things coming through. And so one of the big things I've experienced are these shadow men and shadow men with hats, right? And for years, I would have an occasional shadow man sighting, usually associated with another haunting. And so another haunting would be going on, and then people would also see a shadow man. And then all of a sudden, it became really popular for these shadow men to have hats. And all of a sudden, then all the sightings changed. And now instead of just shadow men, I was getting all these reports of this activity was going on, this activity going on. And then there seemed to be a man who was made of, thick blackness, or he looked like a shadow, or he looked like black mist, and he was wearing a hat. To the point that the interesting thing is, like, is it a tulpa? Like, do we create these things? Are they thought forms? Because a whole bunch of people start talking about them. Is it more likely that we're going to see that kind of sighting, or is it a matter of cognitive bias, or what they call the punch buggy syndrome? When someone mentions a Volkswagen Bug, then all of a sudden the next day you see Volkswagen Bugs all over the place. They were there the whole time, but now that you're thinking about it, you start to see them all the time. So it's really interesting. I think that the media and the internet community have a huge impact on the way that people perceive, but then also experience the paranormal.
Interesting.
So it's also interesting that you can start that snowball effect, where if everybody starts reporting and putting men with hat photos on their websites, then it becomes everything men with hats.
Right, exactly. Now, I wish it became Men Without Hats, because I love that band. Little safety dance joke there for you. Well, and then now, so maybe we make them ourselves because we're thinking of them, right? Now, let's get really creepy with it, because I fully believe that the majority of experiences people have, and I'm not talking about home hauntings here. I'm talking more about whether it's in famously haunted places or the ghostly legends that I explore. I think oftentimes what is there is not what the ghost actually is, and that for some reason they're able to transform into what they present to us, or they can have some control over what's presented to us. Therefore, if a lot of people are talking about people with hats and that's what's getting the attention, can the ghost itself make itself a shadow man with a hat just because it knows that's what people are going to be looking for and that's what the hip thing is? Try turning that question around in your head a few times and see if you can sleep tonight.
Well, and Jeff brings up a joke constantly, but it's everybody dies, and your clothes don't die with you.
Right.
So why are all the ghosts dressed?
Exactly.
And can they put on different clothes when they haunt? Probably. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's when I was in the Bridgewater Triangle, and I was investigating, I went out there with Mike Markowitz, who's known as EVP Mike, and there was this extremely haunted house. It's the Samuel West house. It's featured in Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, one of my books. And we set up these crazy microphones that he uses. Then we went out and we talked to the homeowner. This was the third time I had been there. Every time something, big had happened while I was there. We went out there. We were sitting by the fire, just talking, giving it just an hour. And when we got back, not only did we have EVPs, but we also had EVPs where the voices seemed to be talking to each other. And one of the little snippets of conversation we had was a little kid talking and then an older person saying, shh, quiet, they're recording us. Which makes the argument that the people on the other side, whatever it might be, have an understanding of us trying to interpret them, or us trying to experience them, or us trying to get evidence of them. And if that's the case, like, you can also imagine that they probably have some kind of influence on, what they wear or the nature of their haunting. Maybe.
Yeah, I think they can present themselves to look the way they look, the things that they wore and stuff like that.
Or the way that they perceived themselves. You know what I'm saying? They're trapped in their own understanding of their more immortality.
Right.
And then
Kind of a matrix sort of thing where it's your self-perception.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
if you want to look different, you can.
There's a lot of horrific deaths that have happened, and everyone dies, just as Jeff said. And when I think of the number one spark of ghostly activity, it has to be the Civil War, right? There are, and it's true that it's the number one, the only war other than the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 that have been fought in our soil, right? On our soil.
Right.
But there's also this understanding that the Civil War happens at the time where not only do we have a rise of spiritualism, but we have the rise of this idea, which is I can't remember the Latin of it, but it translates into a good death, and that many of the people in America at that time had this understanding of death having to be a certain way. You had to be home. You had to be surrounded by your family. You had to give off some piece of advice at the end, and this belief was so strong in the people that were living at that time that enemies, when they found someone dying, were known to search the bodies of the soldier who was dying, not for weapons and all that stuff, but for pictures of their loved ones, because people carry those pictures so that if they died in war, they would actually put these pictures around them, so it would be almost like simulating that they were surrounded by the people that they loved, or items from the people, and so they stood as avatars, if you will, of the people who should have been there. And a lot of people didn't get that kind of death, right? Not only did they not get that kind of death, it was really the first big war where you could lose your leg and still survive, and you could lose your arm and it would be amputated and you would survive on. And so there was this disconnect between the physical body and the spiritual body. And so it makes sense that those kind of things and not dying the right way and not being whole would impact people to the point that they would think that they were cursed to walk the earth. They would be more likely to be a ghost because their perception was they hadn't done what they were supposed to do.
Would you perceive them, though, as a ghost with only one arm, or would he actually project himself as a whole body?
I would say it would as he perceived himself. Like, I've gotten reports of amputee ghosts as well as whole ghosts, and then when you go and you do the research, you find out, oh, actually he had lost a leg in the war, or he actually didn't have a hand, or he didn't have, his eye had been poked out, he had lost his eye. This is not just Civil War stuff, but I'm talking just in general. And yet when you see the ghost is fully formed, and so you have to wonder whether it's how the spirit themselves, if this is possible, perceives himself as what they project as their ghost.
Right. That's the way that I would look at it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I am going to be the handsomest ghost in the history of the world. I'm going to be 6'3". all that crazy back hair gone.
Now, I guess you went to a couple places in North Carolina. Did you go to the Devil's Tramping Ground in Raleigh?
Oh, yeah, we went to the Devil's Tramping Ground. And it was, of the things that we had done that week, what we were doing is we were trying to make our way to Indiana. Because I know no one in the world is there on their bucket list to go to Indiana. But I had been researching this cryptid known as a Pukwudgie for years. And other than Massachusetts, the other primary spot for this was in Indiana. So we wanted to get there. I wanted to get to this one place in Indiana. And so we decided to go up the coast, and we researched. We actually have a few episodes where we debate where we're going to go. We decided to go to this place called the Piedmonts. And of the places that we were looking at, One of the most interesting ones to me was the Devil's Trampling Ground, which is said to be, and this is where you were talking about Barbara Perception, the most popular story, and it's actually on Devil's Trampling Ground Road, is that the devil himself landed on Earth. And he decided he was going to torture the people of North Carolina, and he started to walk around in a circle as he was thinking about what to do. And as he began to walk in this circle, he killed whatever might be able to live in there. And so if you go to this area, there's a perfect circle, and nothing ever grows there. And
Right.
it's said that if you put anything in the circle, the devil will immediately throw it out. And people have seen this evil dark figure still walking in circles. Now, other people have said it's where a UFO landed, and the UFO, tainted the ground, and that's why it will never grow. And then other people have said, no, it was a coven of witches who would make human sacrifices, and so the human sacrifices tainted this soil. And we went there. And there's stuff that grows in the middle, right? It now has grass. And I've seen pictures of it being perfectly clear. And I do feel that, there was something weird going on just naturally with the soil. And when we went there, the middle was covered with beer bottles and a chair and all of this other stuff where people had at least tried to get it to things to throw out. Although I'm pretty sure, because we went back there at night, remember we scouted it during the day, went back at night, and people were down there like partying and drinking. We're like, this is probably not a good spot for us.
Right.
But when we went there during the day, we pulled in, we did kind of a lap just to kind of check it out. And then we set up a stationary camera, and then we just kind of walked around for a bit. And what I was noticing in the woods were a lot of cult remnants around this devil's tree, which usually generally happens when some place is known to be really haunted, especially when it gets a nickname like the Devil's Anything, right? And coming from having written Dark Woods, where the subtitle of that book is Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal, and having worked in juvenile detention facilities where we have to identify gang symbolism and cult activity and things like that, I was noticing, different etchings on the trees, and I was noticing these little formations and these little things which I would consider altars. And, it was nothing conclusive, and it was just like, oh, wow, this is a really creepy place. We made a cross, actually, out of wood, and we put it in the middle of the circle, and we decided to go back the next day and see if it was still there. And it was still there. But then
so much for the story.
Maybe
so much for the story, right?
Devil liked it.
So then, afterwards, after we got home, I was and it was a long trip. We went to a lot of places. It was really cool. Like one of those things you're just like, why? I mean, the trip itself changed my life, especially when I actually got to Indiana. And when we got back, I just had that stationary camera on, and this is probably, at least on the Tripping on Legends videos, this is probably the most popular video that we have. It's called Clang and Fly. You're watching it, and then about 20 minutes into the video, you just hear clank, and something flies across the screen as if someone had just kicked a can. And it's, it's clear as day that it's something. Now, is it a bird? All these things kind of happen simultaneously. How many coincidences does it take? But you clearly hear metal being hit, and then something that looks like metal flies across the screen. And, of course, we weren't in the circle at the time. We were exploring in the woods and some of these other things. But to this day, it remains like a really creepy, and to me, it's so easy to say that that's not evidence. That's what we do as a cynical paranormal community. And yet, okay, here's a story. Here's something that happened. What happened coincides with the story that's being told there. You just kind of have to scratch your head and wonder what it was.
Right. And it didn't pick up anybody around either. Just
Oh, there was no one around. We were there by ourselves. Yeah, and if you've ever been there, you have to drive down probably about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile to get to where the Devil's Tramping Ground is. So unless randomly there are people in the woods, which that's fine. I can say that there would be people in the woods. But we're talking, we weren't there on like a Tuesday at like 10 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's not 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's not as if it was prime. Let's go freak people out time.
Right. I knew about the story. I never did go there to research anything. Of course, I wasn't into the paranormal when I was living there. I didn't get started until 2008, and I'd already left North Carolina by then. So.
And the story is popular enough that not only is it told and retold, like I said, the road is called Devil Trampling Ground Road. The story is popular, and it's not as if it's like there's then really good Tomoki hot sauce in the middle of it, so it's an attraction, right? Like there's no reason for it to be hailed and remembered and honored in the way that it is, except for the fact that people have had weird experiences there. So they're not profiting off of acknowledging this legend. They just have to because things are really happening there.
Wow. Our time's just running right on by. Now, I know you said you went to Indiana to look up about pukwudgies. So
yeah,
let's talk about pukwudgies. What are they, and what did you find?
Sure. So pukwudgies are essentially trolls. And when I was researching the Freetown State Forest in the Bridgewater Triangle, people kept telling me the same reports. I got it from 3 different people. All 3 were walking in a wooded area or like surrounding, like at the edge of the woods, and they accidentally came across what to them looked like a little goblin or like a little troll, about 3 feet high, slightly elongated nose. 2 of them, there was no clothes being worn that they could see, but the belly seemed to be hanging over their waistline. And they were completely freaked out by this. Some of people have reported them being hairy. These people all reported it being more skin and just like a lot of hair on top. And the creature then disappeared. Like something would happen, they'd look back and it would be gone. And in every single one of these reports, including a 4th report in an area near the Bridgewater Triangle, this one was wearing a hat though. In all those reports, a few nights later, that same creature came back to visit them, right? And 2 of them were in their bedrooms of people. Like they woke up to find this pukwudgie. One of them, the pukwudgie, was actually physically in the room. And one of them, the pukwudgie, was outside looking into the window. And they were on the 2nd floor. And the 3rd one, the person was in a dark parking lot waiting for someone to get out of work. Like he was just kind of waiting for his girlfriend to get out of work, so he went to kind of hang out for a little bit in this park near the Freetown State Forest. All 3 of them described it basically as these creatures were saying, "We know where you live. Like we can get to you. Stay out of the woods." All of them were completely moved and creeped out and frightened by their experience. And they were all looking to me to explain it. And I'm like, I haven't the slightest idea what that is. And I dug pretty deep into research and books. And I found this one line in a book or this one paragraph in a book that was talking about this famous cryptid called the Dover Demon. And it's by Joe Citro. It's called Passing Strange. And in that paragraph, it essentially was like, the Dover Demon is not a pukwudgie. And he said, the pukwudgies are a native Wampanoag legend, blah, blah, and just a little bit. And I was like, well, what are they? And I hit the internet, and there was nothing on the internet. Literally no hits on the internet other than a book that was called The Good Giant and the Bad Pukwudgie. So I immediately bought that book. I immediately went to the back of the book, and the writer says, these are based on these stories that you find in the Narrow Land. Boom, went out and got the Narrow Land. And I started to read more and more about these pukwudgies, who essentially, for a very long time for the Wampanoag, were just these trickster spirits. They would just pull these little practical jokes. The creator god goes on a vacation. He's essentially cheating on his wife, and he runs off to the sea to be with this woman. And while he's gone, the pukwudgies turn from being cute and cuddly and pulling out these little tricks to starting to burn the Wampanoag's village, to kidnap their children, to lead people into the woods by these things called tai-pai-wunkas, which we've already discussed tonight as ghost lights and will the wisp or wisp of the will. I always get wrong with which way. I always mess up which way it is. Jeff, help me out here. Is it will of the wisp or wisp of the will?
Will of the wisp.
Will of the wisp. Thank you. Yeah. You're like, now that I'm saying it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, did I get it right? They
Just
call
go
them
watch the movie Brave.
They call them Taipaiwunkas, and they're the souls of the Wampanoags that they've killed, and they use them to lure other people out. And this was like a big part of Wampanoag culture. And for years, they were kind of, everything that happened that was wrong, they would say it was the Pukwudgies. And so, every culture, I think, has a creature that's similar to this. And not only do they have a creature that's similar to this, they have different kinds. So in the first, 15 years of me doing Pukwudgie research, the one thing I couldn't wrap my mind around was the actions were very similar, but people were describing them differently. Fiona Broom, for example, described them as Grover on a bad day, even though they were red. So it was more like Elmo on a bad day. Or some people would describe them as, all the same physical traits, but they were completely covered in hair. And then other people would say they only had hair on the top of their head. And when I went to Indiana, I went to Mound State Park in Anderson, Indiana, which is the other big location and the only other book that really focuses on Pukwudgies. It comes from Anderson. And so I went to Mound State Park, and we just happened to be there on a day that one of the rangers who was visiting almost had her doctorate, and she was exploring like the mysticism surrounding the mounds, right? And the alignment of the different mounds in different states, and especially in Ohio, especially, right? And ones that had been destroyed and ones they thought they were. And if you configured them, they seemed to form mirrors of celestial maps and line up with certain lunar cycles. And it was discovered that, there's a reason why Indiana is known as, the crossroads of America, that this Mound State Park, where these very important mounds was a place that Native Americans from all these different tribes, especially from the Northeast, from Canada, for the Delaware tribe, the Biloxi tribe, which was part of the singing Manatee legend that I told earlier, they would all meet there. But of course, they didn't have a common language. And what she told me was that this word Pukwudgie, which is an Algonquin word, right? It is a Wampanoag word, was actually used by different tribes to explain these creepy little things that they were seeing that were causing them trouble in the woods. And that Wampanoag became almost an umbrella term that they would use. Like we might say monster. Well, what kind of monster? Well, it was an abominable snowman, or it was, it was this. And Pukwudgie became the generic term for a lot of these tribes for these little creepy monsters that were causing mischief and were said to be responsible for deaths. And once I discovered that, and once I started tracking Pukwudgies through other tribes, it was just amazing how deep this is in the culture of the Native Americans and different parts of the world, but especially the Native American tribes in North America. And of course, you can easily say they're the same thing as fairies and leprechauns, although slightly different.
Well, I only just found out about the Dover Demon the other night, oddly enough. It was in one of those documentary shows that, Travel Channel. What travel? It's all paranormal all the time. Which is
Aren't
fine
those words
with me.
synonymous with each other now?
No,
Travel Channel, paranormal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But from the drawings, the sketches I saw from witnesses that were independent witnesses, they seem to be like weird versions of grays.
Yeah. And that's why Joe Citro was saying specifically, you might think this is like, you might think the Dover Demon is a Pukwudgie, but it's completely different because, and then he went on to describe them as physically like you're saying, which I thought was interesting because I know Joe, and why he felt that Pukwudgie was popular enough that people would confuse them with the Dover Demon was always odd. The only people who had ever written up to that point was the gentleman from Indiana, Lauren Coleman, Joe Citro, and then me. And so, I hadn't been, and I had to dig deep to find it. And so it was odd that he, when mentioning the Dover Demon, felt that people were going to get confused about something that really no one knew anything about. Forget it now. Pukwudgies are huge. It's like everything, and if you go, as I imagine some of the people who are going to listen to this are going to go and they're going to search, Pukwudgies don't look anything like the way that they're represented now. People who dig the word Pukwudgie and the general idea of them have morphed them into this like drooling monster with porcupine hair and claws and like that, and that's not what I've ever gotten a report of them looking at. But as they've gotten popular, they've taken on the traits that people want them to have, because it's interesting enough, and they love the word, and so they need to make it like more vicious than it actually is. Wow.
All right, we got about 9 minutes left, and so I'll pick out one of the shorter, probably a shorter one, I guess.
You've heard me talk. Nothing is short with me now. You're like, what's your name? Let me tell you for 23 minutes what my name is.
How about apparitions of Flight 40? Was it 401?
401. Yeah, Flight 401. So, wow, you're picking all the ones that I've like rarely talked about on the air. So, and this is one actually we've never done a show on this. It was just because there's nothing to trip, right? In that, I'm not even sure you could attach it. Like legends are bigger than individual stories, and I think that the story of Flight 401 is compelling enough, and I think that none of it is folklore. I think that if it's either true or not true, it's either people are crazy or people aren't. But essentially what happened was there was a flight that went down. I can't remember whether it was Christmas Day or New Year's Day. I believe it was Christmas Day in the Everglades. And all of these people died. I can't remember the exact number, but it was, and of course the captain died, the co-pilot died, the pilot died, the co-pilot died. A person who had gone down kind of below the plane to investigate. There was something wrong with the autopilot, and he had gone down there. He had died. And so in addition to several people who died as passengers, the captain and some of the crew passed. And the important part of that is that after they were able to retrieve things, because of the expense of so much of this, and the fact that some of it was actually preserved by the fact that it had landed in the swamp, they took parts of this plane and they used it as replacement parts in other planes. I believe it was Eastern Airlines, which no longer exists, which is why I think that there could be a break in this story at some point. But where they had replaced parts of Flight 401, people started to see ghosts, right? And they started to see ghosts of, like, there would be a random person in the seat who would then disappear, or they would see weird things flying on the wing, or they would have odd malfunctions of the equipment, and there was the equipment that had been replaced. But then also people were starting to see the ghosts of the captain, the pilot, the co-pilot, and this guy who had fallen, and they knew them in real life. And they're like, wait a minute, I don't understand. Why are you here? And he's like, listen, you need to land the plane rather than continuing on to your destination. And they landed the plane, and they discovered that there was a problem. That would have, if they wouldn't have detected it, and they might have crashed because of it. And this went on for several years. And the sad part about the story is that back then, Eastern Airlines obviously put the kibosh on it, right? They didn't want people to know what was going on. They didn't want people to actually think that the airplanes were haunted, and so they put a lot of gag orders on these employees. And so the story kind of comes out in bits and pieces. And there's been a movie about it, and it's been featured. One of my favorite paranormal shows, which no one remembers, it seems, was this show that only lasted a season called The Others.
I love The Others with Juliette Nichols.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you.
That's when I fell in love with her, yeah.
And what's his name?
The guy who played...
the guy from Suits.
Oh.
Whatever his name.
I was thinking of the guy who was in the newscasting. He was in Sneakers. Played Morrow. Oh, it's been so long. And I have to look it up.
We might be. I don't know why, but my Alexa just went off. I guess it's telling me I'm talking too much. But anyway, they have an entire episode. They have an entire episode that's featured about it. And it's one of these things where, like, well, what would I trip? Like, people say they see weird things in the Everglades where the plane crashed. And I'm like, well, I ain't going into a swamp for a legend trip. Like, I'm not gonna like trounce through the Everglades at night looking for what could be easily explained by something natural. And I've never been able to follow up with employees from Eastern Airlines because most of them are either dead or like, they're still hesitant to talk. But it is one of those stories that it's another hashtag follow the signs, because I bought the book, Ghosts of Flight 401, and then, moved here. Like the next month we decided to move to Florida, and I had no idea. It wasn't even on my mind. I was actually going to move to North Carolina. And it kind of felt like, oh wow, like there's this is great. Florida's going to be great. I'm going to be able to investigate and write stories till I die. And then 10 years later, I start tripping on legends.
Wow. All right, Barbara, Jeff, we got like 4 minutes. Any quick thing you want to say or ask? No. Okay, Barbara.
Well, like I said, it's fascinating. Florida has some really wild stuff happening anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always a story coming out of Florida.
Right.
I mean, almost every day there's a story coming out about Florida. So I don't know if you know about ley lines or any of that. What about specifically about Florida is it that there is just so much going on?
Well, I think that Florida, there's this place called Silver Springs, which is in the book. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and it capitalizes on the idea of there being this beauty and yet something savage about the land as well, right? And Tarzan was shot there, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I think a lot of Florida is like that. It has this beauty to it, and yet if you go to touch that beauty, you get your hand chopped off by a gator. Right. And I think that paradox, that dichotomy, plays on people. And I think that both that beautiful and yet something dangerous is the reason why a lot of people have this kind of like jerk reaction to things in Florida. And then there are so many towns here. You're in Ohio. You guys are in California. I'm from New England. When a town fails, first of all, towns don't fail, right? I taught in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and all the buildings in Lawrence, Massachusetts, when the mills went under, they became other businesses, and they became practice halls for bands. That doesn't happen in Florida. When something bad happen and a town fails because the railroad goes away, people either just leave the town, or they literally cut their houses down, put it on something, and move to another location. And I think that idea of this abandonment, and you're in the middle of the swamp, I think that adds a lot to the kind of way that people perceive life in Florida, and creates these weird things. That and a lot of drugs.
All right, we got a little less than a minute and a half. So why don't you tell people how they can follow you and come check out all your stories like that? And then we want you to stay on until after we're off, and we'll talk with you for a few minutes.
Excellent. Well, the easiest way, if you want any of the books, is to go to Amazon.com. I've got 9 of them. So some are on the Bridgewater Triangle. Some are, I've now finished my first one in Florida, which is Haunted Florida Love Stories. The website is trippingonlegends.com. The podcast is also called Tripping on Legends. So wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's iTunes, whatever, it's a really interesting show. Listen to 3 or 4 episodes, especially the older ones. And if you like it, put a like on it. I'm sorry, I was just listening in the chat room. Someone mentioned I used to work for Spooky South Coast. Yes. And the Facebook page, which I think is really the dumping ground for a lot of what we do. Like it ends up being on the Facebook page is, facebook.com/tripping on legends. I do my show every Tuesday live, and I do it through Facebook and IG, and I'm on midnight.fm. It's a little bit of a different show now that I don't have a co-host. I kind of am doing it myself and kind of, exploring legends in a different way, but it's still a really interesting show to listen to, I think.
All right. Our time is up. We're going to run. We will see you next week at the same time. So until then, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
And Barbara Duncan.
See you next week at the same time. Good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal